Montana Territory, December 1871. The first winter after death was always the hardest. Faith Collins knew this truth as intimately as she knew the contours of her own hands, hands now chapped from the bitter Montana cold as she stacked firewood against her cabin wall. At 23 years old, she had not imagined she would be facing her second Christmas as a widow on this remote homestead. Faith paused, brushing a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face as she surveyed the property that had once held so much promise. 18 months ago, her husband Thomas had succumbed to pneumonia, leaving her alone with their small farm 10 miles outside of Pine Creek. Most women in her position would have returned east or remarried quickly, necessity being what it was on the frontier, but Faith clung stubbornly to the land they had claimed together. Christmas Eve ought to be celebrated with family, not memories, she whispered to herself, adjusting the faded blue calico dress that hung somewhat loosely on her frame. The isolation of frontier life had whittled away at her once plump cheeks, leaving behind a more angular beauty marked by determined green eyes. Faith had built her life around a simple conviction. A woman alone was safer than a woman betrayed by false hope. The frontier had taught her that survival required self-reliance, not dreams. Love had brought her west, but love had abandoned her to the cruel Montana winter. Better to embrace solitude than risk having your heart buried alongside someone you cherished. She bent down to gather the last armful of wood when the sound of hoofbeats approached from the winding trail that connected her homestead to the main road. Visitors were rare, especially in winter, and Faith felt her body tense with the wariness that frontier women quickly developed. Her shotgun rested just inside the doorway, close enough to reach if needed. A small figure on a too-large horse emerged from the tree line. Faith squinted against the afternoon glare off the snow. Not a man, a boy, no more than 8 or 9, hunched against the cold, his thin jacket wholly inadequate for the biting December air. "Hello there," she called, setting down her armload of firewood. "Are you lost, young man?" The boy pulled his mount to a halt, revealing a face pinched with cold and streaked with tears. "My pa and I got separated in the snow. Our wagon, the wheel broke and pa went to find help. He told me to stay, but I got scared when night came and he didn't return." Faith's heart constricted despite her determination to keep it guarded. A lost child on Christmas Eve, even her hard-won pragmatism couldn't withstand such a test. "Come inside before you freeze," she said, approaching the horse. "What's your name?" "Samuel," the boy replied, his teeth chattering. "Samuel Blackett." Faith helped him dismount, noticing how the child's fingers were dangerously red from cold. "Where were you and your father headed, Samuel?" "Crosspoint. Pa got a job at the new sawmill. We've been traveling for weeks." His voice quavered as she led him toward her cabin. "Pa said we'd have Christmas in our new home." Inside the snug log cabin, Faith stoked the fire and wrapped Samuel in a quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender, the last of her mother's sachets from back east. She set water to boil and prepared a simple stew while the boy's shivers gradually subsided. "Your pa will be looking for you," Faith said, ladling the hot stew into a bowl. "First thing tomorrow, we'll ride into Pine Creek and alert the sheriff." "But what if pa comes looking and I'm not there?" Samuel's eyes welled with fresh tears. Faith considered the fading daylight and the gathering clouds that promised more snow. "No one should be out in that weather after dark. If he's as smart as I suspect, he'll have found shelter for the night." She offered what she hoped was a reassuring smile. "We'll leave a lantern burning in the window. If he's searching, he'll see it." As night fell, Faith found herself doing something she hadn't done in months, decorating for Christmas. She retrieved a small box containing the few ornaments she'd brought from Pennsylvania and allowed Samuel to hang them on the scraggly pine branches she'd gathered earlier that week. The child's presence had awakened something she'd carefully buried alongside her husband, the painful yearning for the family they'd planned to raise. "My ma used to make paper stars for our tree," Samuel said wistfully. "Before she went to heaven." Faith's throat tightened. "My mother taught me to make those too." She retrieved some old newspaper and began folding delicate stars while Samuel watched, his eyes growing heavy. Later, after the boy had fallen asleep on her bed, Faith sat by the window watching snowflakes dance in the lantern light. Despite her determination to remain detached, she found herself praying that Samuel's father would find his way to her door, not just for the boy's sake, but because something about the child's presence had cracked open a door she thought permanently sealed. The blizzard howled throughout the night, and Faith dozed fitfully in her rocking chair, waking at every sound. Shortly before dawn, the persistent pounding at her door jolted her fully awake. A man stood on her threshold, snow crusting his coat and hat, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Despite this, Faith could see he was young, perhaps 25, with the lean build of someone accustomed to hard work. His dark hair curled damply around the edges of his hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "I'm looking for my son," he said, his voice rough with worry. "I followed horse tracks in the snow before they disappeared." "Please, have you seen a boy?" "You must be Samuel's father," Faith said, relief washing through her. The man's shoulders sagged, his brown eyes closing briefly. "He's here, he's safe." "Asleep," Faith confirmed, stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze, Mr. Blackett." "Preston," he corrected, stomping snow from his boots. "Preston Blackett." "And you are?" "Faith Collins." She closed the door against the biting wind. "Your son arrived yesterday afternoon, half frozen and frightened." Preston removed his hat, revealing the full impact of his features, strong but gentle somehow, with worry lines that didn't belong on one so young. His gaze darted to the small form bundled on Faith's bed. "Thank God," he whispered. "When I returned to the wagon and found him gone," he trailed off, swallowing hard. Faith gestured toward the fire. "Warm yourself." "I'll make coffee." As she busied herself with the morning routine, Faith observed Preston from the corner of her eye. He moved to his son's side, kneeling to brush the hair from the boy's forehead with a tenderness that made her chest ache. In that simple gesture, she saw everything she had lost, and everything she had refused to let herself want again. "The wheel broke," Preston explained quietly as Faith handed him a steaming cup. "I left Samuel with the wagon while I went for help, but the snow came faster than expected. By the time I returned with supplies and men from town, he was gone. We searched until dark, but the storm made it impossible." "He was afraid," Faith said. "Children often make decisions from fear that seem perfectly reasonable to them." Preston studied her over the rim of his cup. "You sound like you speak from experience." Faith looked away. "I grew up with 4 younger brothers. No children of your own." The question hit like a physical blow. "No." Something in her tone must have warned him not to pursue that line of inquiry. Preston turned his attention back to Samuel, who was beginning to stir. "Pa," the boy's sleepy voice quickly transformed into an excited shout. "Pa," he launched himself from the bed and into his father's arms. Preston caught him, coffee sloshing over the cup's edge as he set it down to properly embrace his son. "You scared 10 years off my life, running off like that." "I was scared too," Samuel admitted, burying his face against his father's shoulder. Faith turned away from the reunion, fighting the tightness in her throat. She busied herself preparing breakfast, acutely aware of the foreign sensation of other people in her space, people who belonged to each other in ways she no longer belonged to anyone. "Mrs. Collins hung my stocking," Samuel was telling his father excitedly, "and we made paper stars for the tree branch. She said Santa might find me even here." Preston's eyes met Faith's over his son's head. "That was very kind of Mrs. Collins." "It's Miss," Faith corrected automatically. "Mrs. Collins was my mother-in-law." Understanding dawned in Preston's expression. "I'm sorry for your loss." "It was some time ago." The lie came easily, though 18 months hardly qualified as some time in grief's reckoning. After breakfast, Faith expected them to leave immediately, but the weather had other plans. The storm had intensified overnight, blanketing the landscape in treacherous drifts. "You can't travel in this," Faith said, peering through the frosted window. "The trail to town will be impassable until it clears." Preston frowned. "We've imposed enough. I can't ask you to shelter us through Christmas." "You didn't ask," Faith pointed out. "And I'm not offering out of charity. It would be criminal to send anyone out in that weather, especially a child." The decision made, Faith found herself navigating the strange intimacy of sharing her small cabin with virtual strangers. She set Preston to chopping more wood while she and Samuel prepared a modest Christmas dinner from her winter stores. "My pa is the best builder in the whole territory," Samuel informed her as they peeled potatoes. "He's going to build us a proper house in Crosspoint, with a real glass window and everything." "Is that so?" Faith smiled despite herself. "And what does your father build exactly?" "Anything." Samuel's voice held pure admiration. "Houses, furniture, wagons. He fixed our old wagon 6 times before the wheel broke for good." When Preston returned with the firewood, Faith noticed him examining her cabin with a craftsman's eye. "Your husband built this place?" he asked, stacking logs by the hearth. "We built it together," Faith corrected. "Thomas taught me to use a saw and hammer before his illness." Preston nodded appreciatively. Good, solid work. But your north wall needs reinforcement before the worst of winter hits. Faith bristled slightly. I'm aware, I've been gathering materials to make repairs. I didn't mean. Preston stopped, looking chagrined. I apologize. It's a habit to notice such things. Pa can fix it, Samuel chimed in. Can't you, Pa? Faith watched discomfort cross Preston's features. Samuel, Miss Collins doesn't need our help. But you always say we should repay kindness, the boy persisted. Faith found herself caught between pride and practicality. The wall did need work, and the task had been daunting to contemplate alone. Perhaps we could discuss it after the storm passes, she conceded. As Christmas Eve deepened around them, the small cabin transformed under the combined efforts of a woman determined to maintain her independence, and a father and son with nowhere else to go. Samuel's excitement proved contagious as they prepared a humble feast of rabbit stew, corn bread, and dried apple pie. In the evening, Preston produced a small wooden flute from his pack and played familiar carols while Samuel sang in a clear, sweet voice. Faith found herself humming along, then singing too, her voice rusty from disuse but growing stronger with each melody. You have a beautiful voice, Preston said during a pause. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. My father was a church choir director. He insisted all his children learn to sing properly. My late wife loved Christmas carols, Preston said softly. I promised her I'd make sure Samuel always had music in his life. The simple statement opened something between them, a mutual recognition of loss that needed no elaboration. How long has she been gone? Faith asked gently. 3 years this spring, childbirth. Preston's gaze fell on Samuel, who was arranging pine cones by the hearth, the baby too. Faith's heart constricted. I'm sorry. It's why we're heading to Crosspoint, Preston continued. A fresh start. The sawmill needs a foreman with carpentry experience, and they're building a proper school there. A school would be good for Samuel, Faith agreed, watching the boy yawn widely. Later, after Samuel had fallen asleep in Faith's bed again, and they had arranged a makeshift pallet for Preston near the fire, Faith found herself unable to sleep in her rocking chair. The presence of others in her carefully ordered world had disrupted more than her routine. It had disrupted the protective walls she'd built around her heart. You should take the bed, Preston's voice came softly from the darkness. I can sleep in the chair. I'm accustomed to it, Faith replied. Since Thomas, she didn't finish the thought. Silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Preston spoke again. Samuel likes you. He hasn't taken to anyone that quickly since his mother died. Faith smiled into the darkness. He's a special boy. The frontier is no place to raise a child alone, Preston said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by him, dragging him from place to place, chasing work. You're providing for him, Faith replied, teaching him to be strong and resourceful. Those are gifts in a land like this. Perhaps Preston shifted on his palate, but there are other things a child needs. A home, stability, a mother's touch. Faith felt her throat tighten. Some things aren't possible, Mr. Blackett, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. Preston, he corrected gently. And I've found that out here, the impossible happens with surprising frequency. Faith didn't respond, but sleep eluded her long after Preston's breathing had deepened into slumber. His words had touched something she had deliberately buried, the possibility that life might still hold surprises, even after devastating loss. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Samuel woke with the exuberance of any child on Christmas Day, regardless of circumstances. To Faith's surprise, Preston produced small gifts from his pack, a carved wooden horse for his son and, unexpectedly, a delicate handkerchief for her. It's not much, he said apologetically, presenting the simple square of cotton embroidered with tiny blue flowers. But I wanted Samuel to see that we acknowledge kindness. It's lovely, Faith said, genuinely touched by the gesture. She had also prepared modest gifts, a knitted scarf for Samuel and a leather-bound notebook for Preston. For your building plans, she explained as he ran his fingers over the smooth cover. This is too generous, Preston protested. I've had it for years, Faith admitted. Thomas bought it for sketching but never used it. After a simple Christmas breakfast, reality intruded. The storm had passed and the road would soon be clear enough for travel. Preston and Samuel needed to continue their journey to Crosspoint, and Faith needed to return to her solitary existence. I could still look at that north wall before we go, Preston offered as he helped Faith wash the breakfast dishes. Pride warred with practicality in Faith's mind. I wouldn't want to delay your journey. An hour's work, Preston insisted, for my peace of mind if nothing else. So Faith found herself standing in the crisp December air, holding boards while Preston expertly reinforced her cabin wall. Samuel helped by carrying nails and smaller pieces of wood, chattering happily about Christmas and their interrupted journey. That should hold through winter and then some, Preston declared when the work was finished. He wiped his brow despite the cold, studying his handiwork with satisfaction. Thank you, Faith said simply. The words felt inadequate for the genuine help he had provided, not just the physical labor, but the reminder that human connection still existed beyond her isolated world. As Preston hitched their horse to Faith's small sleigh, his own wagon being abandoned until spring thaw, Samuel tugged at Faith's skirt. Do we have to go? I like it here. Faith knelt to the boy's level, fighting the unexpected emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. You and your father have a new life waiting in Crosspoint, a proper home, remember. But you're alone here, Samuel persisted with a child's innocent clarity. Aren't you lonely? Faith glanced up to find Preston watching them, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, she admitted to Samuel, but this is my home. It doesn't have to be, Preston said quietly, then looked startled, as if the words had escaped without permission. Faith stood slowly. What do you mean? Preston ran a hand through his dark hair, clearly discomfited. Forgive me, that was presumptuous. No, Faith said, please explain. Preston drew a deep breath. You have skills, Miss Collins, you're capable and strong. Crosspoint is a growing town. They need people like you, people who know how to build to survive, to make something from nothing. You're suggesting I abandon my homestead. Faith felt a flicker of indignation. I'm suggesting you consider that a homestead without hope is just land, Preston replied. This place is full of ghosts for you. I recognize the look, I see it in the mirror. Faith turned away, unable to face the truth in his words. She had clung to this land because it was all she had left of Thomas, but in doing so, she had entombed herself alongside his memory. Think about it, Preston continued gently. That's all I'm asking. They departed shortly after, Samuel waving frantically from the sleigh until they disappeared around the bend. Faith stood in her doorway long after they had gone, the handkerchief Preston had given her clutched in her fingers. The days after Christmas passed with excruciating slowness. Faith moved through her routines mechanically, more aware than ever of the silence that permeated her existence. She caught herself listening for Samuel's chatter, for Preston's deep voice humming carols as he worked. On New Year's Eve, Faith made a decision. She packed essential belongings, securing the cabin as best she could. Come spring, she would return to either reclaim her homestead or sell it to one of the new settlers pushing ever westward. But for now, she would follow the strange spark that had ignited during those Christmas days, the possibility that life continued even after devastating loss. The journey to Crosspoint took 2 days, slowed by winter conditions and Faith's deliberate pace. She questioned her sanity with each mile, rehearsing and discarding explanations for her sudden appearance. What if Preston had merely been polite? What if Crosspoint had no place for her? What if the connection she'd felt had been manufactured from desperation and holiday sentimentality? Crosspoint revealed itself as a bustling frontier town nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys against the winter sky. The sawmill dominated one end of the main street, its operations evident even from a distance. Faith directed her horse toward the center of town, where a decent-sized boarding house stood. Looking for lodging, miss, the proprietress was a stout woman with kind eyes. We don't get many single ladies traveling alone. I'm hoping to find work, Faith explained. I have experience with sewing, cooking, and basic carpentry. The woman raised her eyebrows. Carpentry. That's unusual. My husband and I built our own homestead, Faith explained. I'm handy with tools. Well, the sawmill's always hiring strong backs, though I've never known them to take on a woman. The proprietress studied Faith thoughtfully. The school needs a teacher come spring if you've got learning. Faith hesitated. Actually, I was hoping to find the Blacketts, Preston and Samuel. They would have arrived just after Christmas. Recognition dawned on the woman's face. Oh. The new mill foreman and his boy. Handsome fellow, that one. Half the widows in town have already brought welcome baskets, she chuckled. They're staying in the company house down by the creek until their own place is built. Faith felt a strange twist of discomfort at the thought of other women pursuing Preston. Could you direct me there? The small house was easy to find, set apart from the main cluster of buildings near the gurgling creek that gave the town part of its name. Faith approached with growing trepidation, rehearsing once more what she might say. Before she could knock, the door flew open and Samuel burst out, evidently heading somewhere with great purpose. He skidded to a halt when he saw Faith, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Miss Faith," he exclaimed, loud enough to wake the dead. Pa, come quick, it's Miss Faith." Preston appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. "Faith." She stood awkwardly beside her horse, suddenly aware of how impulsive her journey had been. "I hope I'm not intruding." Intruding, Preston stepped out, a smile spreading across his face. "You could never intrude." Samuel bounced excitedly between them. "Are you staying? Please say you're staying." "I don't know yet," Faith admitted. "I thought I might see if Crosspoint has work for someone with my skills." Preston's smile deepened. "As it happens, I know the mill foreman quite well. I'm certain he could find a place for someone with carpentry experience." His eyes held hers, "especially someone who makes excellent dried apple pie." Faith felt warmth spread through her despite the January cold. "I was thinking perhaps I could stay until spring at least, see if Crosspoint might be a place to start fresh." "I believe it could be," Preston said softly, "for all of us." Samuel tugged at Faith's hand. "You can stay with us." "Can't she, Pa? We have an extra room and everything." Preston flushed slightly. "Samuel, that wouldn't be proper. Miss Faith will want her own accommodations." The boarding house seemed nice, Faith said, though the thought of staying with them held an unexpected appeal. "At least come in for dinner," Preston insisted. "Samuel has talked of nothing but you and Christmas since we arrived." That dinner became the first of many, as winter gradually yielded to spring. Faith found lodging at the boarding house but spent most evenings with Preston and Samuel, helping with the plans for their permanent home and taking meals together. The townsfolk quickly accepted her as part of the Blackett household, even as she maintained her separate residence for propriety's sake. Preston secured her a position at the mill, where her practical knowledge of wood and tools proved valuable in the finishing shop. By March, she was teaching the first classes in Crosspoint's new schoolhouse, her father's insistence on education finally finding purpose on the frontier. As the snow melted, revealing the first green shoots of spring, Faith made the journey back to her homestead with Preston and Samuel. The cabin stood silent and waiting, preserved by the winter snows. "It's smaller than I remembered," Faith said as they approached. "Too small for the dreams you had," Preston observed quietly. Faith nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. She had built the cabin with Thomas, but their plans had extended far beyond its walls, plans for children, for a larger house, for a life that never materialized. "What will you do with it?" Preston asked as they stood in the doorway. Faith surveyed the simple home she had shared with her husband, seeing it through new eyes. "Sell it, I think. The Jenkins family from town has been looking for land. This would suit them well." The decision brought unexpected peace. As they prepared to leave, Faith gathered the last of her belongings, including Thomas's wedding band, which she had kept in a small box beside her bed. She tucked it into her pocket, a tangible reminder of the love that had brought her west but would no longer define her future. On the ride back to Crosspoint, Samuel fell asleep in the wagon, leaving Faith and Preston to talk quietly beneath the emerging stars. "I never properly thanked you," Faith said. Preston glanced at her. "For what?" "For suggesting I come to Crosspoint, for showing me there could be life beyond grief." Preston's hands tightened on the reins. "I should be thanking you. Samuel needs a woman's influence, and he hesitated. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to talk with, to share the day's burdens." They rode in companionable silence for several minutes before Preston spoke again. "Faith, I know it's only been a few months since Christmas, but I find myself wondering if," he broke off, clearly struggling for words. Faith felt her heart quicken. "If what?" Preston guided the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. "If you might consider making our arrangement more permanent." "Our arrangement," Faith echoed, unsure of his meaning. "I'm making a mess of this," Preston muttered. "What I mean to say is, Samuel adores you, and I have developed feelings that go beyond friendship or gratitude." Faith's breath caught in Preston. "I know it's soon," he hurried on. "Too soon perhaps, but out here life doesn't always allow for conventional timelines. I've seen how you are with Samuel, how you've brought laughter back into our lives. I've watched you build a place for yourself in Crosspoint through sheer determination and skill." He reached for her hand, his touch warm against her skin. "I never expected to find love again after losing Sarah. I'd convinced myself that the frontier was no place for second chances. But then you took in a lost boy on Christmas Eve, and everything changed." Faith felt tears prickle behind her eyes. "I thought I needed to be alone to stay safe, that loving someone meant inevitably losing them to this harsh land." "We could lose each other tomorrow," Preston acknowledged, "or 50 years from now. But I'd rather face whatever comes with you beside me than spend another day wondering what might have been." Faith looked at the sleeping boy, then back at the man beside her. This family that had somehow become entangled with her own fate through a Christmas storm and a lost child. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like that very much." Preston's smile illuminated his features in the gathering dusk. "Truly." Instead of answering, Faith leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, a kiss that held the promise of mornings and evenings to come, of a home built together rather than in isolation. As they continued toward Crosspoint, Samuel stirred sleepily in the back of the wagon. "Are we home yet?" Faith and Preston exchanged a look full of shared understanding. "Almost," Preston answered, reaching for Faith's hand once more. "We're nearly home." By the following Christmas, the Blackett home was complete, a sturdy two-story house with glass windows and a wide porch overlooking the creek. Faith had sold her homestead to the Jenkins family, who were expecting their first child in the spring. The proceeds had gone toward establishing a small carpentry shop where Preston created furniture, while Faith taught both academics and woodworking at the expanding school. On Christmas Eve, Faith stood in their doorway watching the snow fall gently on Crosspoint. Behind her, Preston and Samuel decorated a proper Christmas tree with paper stars and the ornaments she had carried from Pennsylvania. "Thinking about last Christmas?" Preston asked, coming to stand beside her, his arm slipping comfortably around her waist. Faith leaned into him, her wedding ring new and still somewhat unfamiliar, catching the lamplight. "How everything can change in a year," she marveled, "from believing I would always be alone to this." "From a broken wagon wheel to a family," Preston agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Samuel's voice called from inside, "Ma, Pa. Come see the star I made." Faith smiled at the title she was still growing accustomed to. Motherhood had come to her not through birth, but through the loving acceptance of a boy who had needed her as much as she needed him. As they turned back into the warmth of their home, Faith caught sight of a lone rider approaching through the snow, another traveler seeking shelter on Christmas Eve perhaps, or a neighbor with last-minute holiday wishes. "We should put the lantern in the window," she told Preston, "so travelers can find their way." Preston nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken between them. "A light in the darkness," he agreed, "like the one that led me to your door last year." Together, they placed the lantern where it would be visible from the road, a beacon for any lost souls seeking shelter from the storm, a symbol of the truth they had discovered together. That even in the harshest frontier, love could take root and flourish, transforming isolation into belonging and strangers into family.